Tonight, I introduce to you Jamaica, Dr. Hume Johnson. Dr. Johnson, welcome to Partner Draw TV.
Thank you so much, Andre. It's a pleasure.
You're sipping from your cup, Doc. You ready to give a lecture, I see.
I'm suffering from the cold, so I hope that my voice actually doesn't break. So I'm actually sipping some tea and minding my business.
Mm. So,
All right.
Dr. Johnson, welcome to Partner Draw TV.
Thank you
It's
so
a
much.
pleasure having you on this platform. You know, 10,000 strong is our new name over here. The rest of the
I'm very
students will
proud of you.
certainly
I mean,
come.
I mean, as someone who understands production, it takes a lot of effort to pull together one show. So to do it several times for the week, that's extraordinary. I congratulate you, and it's an important job you're doing, and I appreciate you for it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Johnson. So, Dr. Johnson, introduce yourself to the 6,000 plus that is growing tonight. Tell the world, I know who you are, but they all need to know who this powerful brain, the voice is.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So my name is Dr. Hume Johnson. I am a former Jamaican journalist. I was a television presenter with the Jamaica Information Service, which is the news arm of the government of Jamaica. And I was also a specialist newsreader with Fame FM under the late Francois Saint-Just, God bless him, and also with Radio Jamaica. So I was also within that period a political speechwriter with the People's National Party administration. I think at the time, PJ Patterson was prime minister, or Peter Phillips. I can't remember right now. But
It would definitely be Sir Percival Patterson.
so,
Mr. Phillips was nowhere around.
so I'm familiar with the media landscape in Jamaica and also the political arena. I left Jamaica and I did my doctorate in politics in New Zealand, and I studied the challenges to building a real civil society in Jamaica. So every time you talk, I'm really fascinated because we have really had a sedate civil society, and that was what my research was about. And then I was in Australia teaching journalism, television and radio journalism to Australians. And I moved to the United States 12 years ago, and I'm teaching media and communication and also public relations. So the subject that you're discussing of traditional media, of new media, and the intersection, that's what I've been teaching for the last 12 years in the United States. And sometimes I'm disappointed I'm not teaching in Jamaica because some of the conversations I'm having in class with the Americans, these are conversations we should be having in Jamaica as well. And so I was glad that you brought up this discussion of the challenges you're facing in terms of lending your voice to the issues affecting Jamaica. So I look forward to having a conversation with you and your students about that.
So, Dr. Johnson, let's get welcome again. There's so many hats you wear, but for tonight, we want to scope into is new media a threat to traditional media? Or can new media complement traditional media? Or
Mhm.
is it a case that traditional media significantly and seriously sees new media as a challenge that will evade who they are?
You know what? First of all, let for the people in the class who they don't study media and they're not paying attention. Let's talk about the role of media generally, whether it's new media or traditional media. The fundamental role of media in a democracy is to inform the public. So that's one role: inform the public. You're meant to entertain as well, and they do that very well in Jamaica. And the third aspect, which is very critical, is that you're meant to hold government to account. The media is meant to be the watchdog of government. And watchdog, if you think of a dog, you're supposed to be really alert, ask the tough questions. You're meant to be interrogating the political representatives, because they are the ones who are making the decisions on our behalf. So we have to make sure that they're spending the public money in the way that they should. They are taking care of their responsibilities in terms of the public goods that people need: water, proper roads,
Electricity.
transportation, electricity, and a consistent supply of these goods. So the poor having a social safety net where they can feel a sense of dignity in their own society. And the conveying the information part is also very important. But sometimes we forget that in conveying information, we also have to make sure that the information is accurate, and that when people listen to the media, they are using this information to make informed choices about their lives. Therefore, whether I'm going to take the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, whether I'm going to take public transport, whether it's safe to show up in my neighborhood, all of those things, we make our decisions every single day based on the information we get from the media. So we expect the media to operate. I wouldn't even say objective anymore, because fair and balanced is not even the obligation anymore. The obligation is for truth and for facts. And
For
so
truth and for
facts, accurate information. If we don't have accurate information, if we don't have factual information, if you hide things from the Jamaican people, then they don't have enough information to make those choices. When they go to the polls to vote for a government, if they don't have the right information, they don't make the right choices. So the media is very essential in a democracy. New media has arrived. And because when we talk about new media, we're talking about, let's say, traditional media is radio, television, which came on stream in 1948, I think was the first television, black and white. Then you had radio was in the 20s. The newspaper was more than 100 years ago. In the first pandemic, the only media that was available was a newspaper. So now in the 80s, when they developed the computer chip, then you realize that we now have the World Wide Web. And so this has exploded the media landscape, and not everybody is adjusting very well to that, because the media, journalism practice and journalism is undergoing a radical shift. And it's not even, it's an understatement to say even radical shift. It's a tumultuous time, both as a profession and as a business. And because the media is a business, and I want your students to understand that even though the media has a fundamental role in the democracy, it's a public service to citizens. In the contemporary period, the media operates as a business. Information is a commodity, and that's why you have to pay for data. That's why you have to pay every time you go on the Gleaner's website. You have to pay if you're trying to access the news. If you're overseas and you're trying to access TVJ News, you have to pay. If you want to access the New York Times, you have to pay a subscription fee. So information is being bought and sold. You see programs brought to you by, the news is brought to you by. It means that there's a corporate entity, a business that is sponsoring or advertising during those segments. So money is being exchanged for information, and that complicates the news that you get. So when we have business players sponsoring news content, if I have a business player, say Grace Kennedy, for want of a better company, say Grace Kennedy sponsoring my newscast. If there is a problem at Grace Kennedy, I would hesitate to comment on it.
To feature on that.
I would hesitate to interrogate. I would hesitate to be critical, because they're sponsoring the show and they're putting their ads in the newspaper. And so part of the problem with journalism is that it runs as a business. It is in the business of profit. So ratings become important. And so editorial decisions, like what stories to run, which stories should get covered. How many
Mm.
stories are we going to pay attention to? What stories are we going to lead with? What stories come to the front page of the newspaper and what stories go to the back of the newspaper? Those are all editorial decisions that somebody takes. And then you have new media, the bloggers and the TikToks and the Instagrams and the YouTubes, where anybody with a phone with video on it can create their own content. So traditional media, they have to reinvent themselves and they're struggling to figure out how to reinvent themselves in this new arena where we're no longer passive recipients. So one time
Mhm.
when you're looking for news, whatever you read or you listen to or you watch, it was what traditional media decided to give you. So whatever news they decided that you should get, that's
That's what you're getting.
that's what we're getting. So nowadays we're not passive anymore because in the past when we only had the radio and the TV
And the
uh,
gleaner.
and the Gleaner, you would find that a fraction of the audience would probably write a letter to the editor and they would convey whatever grievance they have. Or
Would
they
you
would
call that the I'm just going to provoke you tonight. Would you call that the silent majority?
I don't know if the majority is silent anymore. Jamaicans have long shed their primitive innocence, and so we're no longer, you can't pull the wool over our eyes anymore. And so the government is waking up to that reality and they're not comfortable with it. The challenge with media now is that one time when you could call Mutty Perkins, and I'm aging myself by mentioning Mutty Perkins, or you could call Miss Gludon. The idea now is that those folks, if you remember, Miss Gludon and Mutty Perkins were very oriented to the poor. They understood the Jamaican people. They despised the indignity of poverty. They held
Mm.
government to account. They held their ears to the road and to the ground to hear what Jamaicans were saying, and they mediated to try to get to the corridors of power, to get those politicians to do their job on the ground. What we have now is an elitist media where
Repeat that, Dr. Johnson.
the Jamaican media operates in a very elitist framework where the folks who are on media, their responsibility seems to be only to a set of people. And they are not so much concerned about the condition of the Jamaican people. I think they're concerned about ratings, about profit, about how they appear, about that they are the only ones with a voice. And so,
Oh.
thank goodness for the internet. It has democratized the space, exploded the space. So, bloggers like yourself can emerge where there's a vacuum, voices will emerge. So when traditional journalists have abandoned their duty to the public, when they refuse to ask the tough questions, when they have to be beholden to the person who is sponsoring their show and to the person who is advertising on their station, when they are beholden to the political infrastructure that they support, then they can't ask the questions that you would expect them to ask. They won't cover the stories that you expect them to cover. The poor person who is bawling that the roads need fixed, that they have no water, that the kids can't get to school, they're blinded to that because
Mm.
those stories are not sexy. Those stories will not sell. Those stories will rarely ever make the front page. They're not
Wow.
sweet talking points. And so it creates space for bloggers. And bloggers, it's an exciting, it is problematic in a lot of ways, and we'll get to that. But let's talk about the positives of having bloggers. Number one, bloggers diversify the news agenda. They get stuck on issues that mainstream media ignore. So we probably wouldn't hear about Slickiana. We probably wouldn't hear about Donnelly. Maybe. a story here or there, but it.
But you're saying that with the emergence of new media, we probably there's a high probability that these cases would just be another mention
Yes,
and it is left at that.
yes, we're moving on to other stories. We
Mm.
move on quite quickly in Jamaica, as you well know. So if the media sets the agenda for the society, it's like when you go to a meeting and they have a set of agenda, it's the media which sets the agenda for a society. So it's the Jamaican media that determines what issues they're going to put up, and we, the public, these are the issues that we consider to be the nation's most important issues.
So the media sets the agenda for the nation.
Yes. So, for
And with the
example,
emergence of new media, we disturb that status quo, we disturb that agenda, we disturb the government's narrative.
part of it is that if there are other voices showing us that there are other stories out there, and one of the things I appreciate about new media globally, I remember the Black Lives Matter movement started in St. Louis with that young man Mike Brown, who was shot and killed by the police, and his body was lying on the ground for about 6 hours. CNN was covering, and mainstream media was covering other things, as they do. And it was people with phones, cell phones, that was recording this young man's body on the ground and the indignity of it, that caught social media's attention, on Twitter in particular. Mainstream media logged into what was happening. They saw that it was trending on social media.
Mm.
And so that is how CNN had actually gone there. So in instances like that, it is new media which actually sets the agenda. It's new media which is forcing news that would ordinarily be ignored onto the public agenda, at the top of the public agenda. So in
Wow.
Jamaica, what we have found through your program in particular, that there were issues that would ordinarily have been ignored, the murder of those young women. We would have probably had a story or two, but the consistent advocacy around the issue, we would not have seen that, not necessarily on Jamaican media. And the thing with media is that if you do not keep talking about it, nothing gets done. If we move on from talking about it, then the public shifts their emotion, their energy, and so the policymakers and the crime fighters, they pay little or no attention to issues which are not being discussed. So bloggers have an important role to play. And secondly, you all go hyper local. And that is an important thing, because when you think of Jamaica, we think that Jamaica is Kingston. And so the things that happen in Kingston tends to make the news. And so rural issues, rural poverty gets ignored, rural crime gets ignored. The suffering of people in rural areas never gets attention. The mother who is suffering from whatever, loss of their
Poverty,
child,
with
poverty,
the myriads of rape
whatever.
cases and the rape cultures and all of that.
All of that gets ignored. So bloggers tend to look at hyper local issues that people care about. These are the issues that people want to talk about. And one of the things that has happened over time, we used to protest a lot in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And protest, one guy said to me when I was doing my research that protest and demonstration is a poor people press conference, because this is how the Jamaican people got the attention of the government. Just bundle
Wow.
the place, disrupt everything. And then the media would cover that, traditional media, and then they had no choice but to show up at the demonstration, and then the issue would be addressed. But we're seeing a decline in that kind of protest. And what you're seeing now is people using their voice, and you have created an avenue for them. And the counterpoint to that is that there's an extraordinary disconnection of the political representatives from the people. Ordinary Jamaicans do not have a line to their political representatives. They do not have a line to the government. They
True.
feel an abiding sense of neglect a neglect of contact, a neglect of connection, a neglect of conversation. And so
Mm.
when the government says they're listening and responding, I laugh because it's so incredibly inaccurate. And it's a farce because successive administrations have listened less. And when social media emerged, what they managed to do was they were able to, because of their popularity and their celebrity and their power, they were able to talk to the public. So we are following them, and they could just ignore us because the Jamaican citizens, yes, we could follow them. We could see what they're
Mm.
saying. You could tweet back at them or you could comment on what they're saying, but they don't respond. So they get to talk, but we didn't get to talk back. So with spaces like the Andre Stevenson show, you have this notion now where the Jamaican people can actually offer their feedback. They can stampede underneath the Prime Minister's Instagram page and they can make their comments. You can broadcast on issues that resonate with the Jamaican people. And so they hear it. They may not like it. I don't think they can deal very well. Historically, the Labour Party has not done really well. The PNP as well, but the Labour Party in particular have not been very. They're not very comfortable with critique. They are not
Mm.
very comfortable with the idea that the media's job is to hold them accountable. And
Wow.
so they expect that their friends in the media to just be a trumpet, a sounding board for them, not
So therefore,
for questioning or interrogation.
you said earlier, the role of media is to be the watchdog of government. When
Absolutely.
a media house or a media personality now becomes the mouthpiece of government or private sector, for instance, haven't they failed to be responsible to the public and to hold government to account?
Of course, they're failing in their duty.
So you would say presently, Dr. Johnson, the present traditional media landscape in Jamaica, call it as it is, call it as it is, have they failed to be the watchdog for the government, or is it that they are just being the business of the day?
We have failed in our duty, and because I am friends with them and I have been their colleagues before, I have been on the inside of it. We have fundamentally failed in our duty to the Jamaican people. Our job
Mm.
is to interrogate politicians, is to hold them to account, is to make sure that they are working on behalf of the Jamaican people, is to expose corruption. That is the
Dr.
duty.
Johnson,
That is the job. And I
take for
think
instance,
we have failed on that account.
take for instance, in recent times, there's been a major financial fraud in one of our financial institutions in Jamaica.
Mhm.
And we are now learning that our Minister of Finance, from way back as 2020, August 2020, had the report of 6 securities institution on his desk. Acknowledge receipt of the report from the Financial Services Commission. 2023, when we're now having this issue of financial irregularities, a finance minister is going to say, oh, he got the report, but he never looked at it. In any other jurisdictions across the world, Dr. Johnson, wouldn't that finance minister be held accountable both by traditional media and new media?
At the very least, questions would have to be asked.
Dr.
At
Johnson,
the
to
very
date, I
least.
have not seen where those who are on radio, on TV, in print media, pressing the Minister of Finance to ask those probatory questions, to press him and drill him on an interview, to ask him if this is gross negligence, what kind of oversight is this? And even if these oversights are happening, Dr. Johnson, are you going to tell me Can he give us further reports of the other institutions that were on that report? Are they similar to SSL, or is it that they have corrected their procedures? These are serious probatory questions that ought to be answered. And I am not hearing those who are in the traditional media space drilling, pressing, asking, investigating. What about those other securities business? Are we going to have another meltdown where SSL is not just one, but we have 6 other financial institutions just having this kind of fraudulent scheme happening and nothing comes out of it? It is the duty of the media to be the watchdog.
Yeah. I think what has happened in Jamaica is that we have interpreted the role of news media as the conveyor of information. So they'll tell you what has happened, but there's no real follow up. There's no real. I don't know if we have a culture of real investigative reporting. Over a period of time, you have had maybe 1 or 2 reports. It does take a lot of resources. It's a lengthy process when you're investigating an issue. You have to stick with it, and your editor have to give you the resources to continue on this story, which sometimes takes weeks or months for you to get it to the table. And so I don't think over time we have developed a culture of investigative reporting. So Jamaican politicians get away with murder. I mean, quite literally, they get away because a lot of the media, I think we reverence politicians. And even when we are friends with them, and I think we're a small country, we're always going to know each other. And journalists work within politics, and political news is a main source of news, and our job is to investigate government. So there's going to be that symbiotic relationship between the media and politics. But I
Indeed.
think I think real journalists who understand their role and understand their duty to the public will ask tough questions, except that we have the business model where profit, who is sponsoring, who is going to get paid, tends to trump the questions that should be asked.
Interesting. So, Dr. Johnson, do you believe that traditional media needs to get it right and to adopt? Or do you see new media as the new way of the future?
Okay, can bloggers replace traditional journalism? The short answer is no. And you know why I say that? The blogger is okay. So for a news story to be done, you need somebody to go out and fetch the news. They need to confirm the story, the accuracy of the story. We call it multi-source confirmation. So it's a requirement that journalists validate the facts of the story from 3 sources. Doesn't have to be eyewitnesses only. It can be documents. It could be police report. You're rarely going to find a blogger calling up the police or heading down to the police station to confirm whether an accident has taken place for real or whether a murder has in fact been committed. And they're not going to be reading documents and doing this sort of investigative work that the traditional journalists will do. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. I see you reading a lot and reading widely, which is very important. But I don't think that bloggers are generally going to do that. The nature of blogging is that it's subjective, it's opinion, it's their perspective. And so we're entering an arena which is new. It's this space where you have this media culture which mixes rumors and opinion with facts. And so traditional media, especially in post-colonial societies like Jamaica, they can't stand it. They feel very uncomfortable. They want the bloggers to just shut up. They believe that the bloggers are not real journalists. But what we have found is that they're breaking stories. Bloggers break stories. They are subjective. They're giving their opinion. They have no obligation to go look for multi-source confirmation. That's not their job. They feel like commenting on an issue. They can get up one day and stay in their pajamas and talk about an issue which concerns them and concerns several other thousands of people. And they may not see that issue being covered. And so they feel that it is their duty as a public journalist. They call them citizen journalists to raise those issues. They are not trained journalists. They haven't gone to journalism school. They are not following the standards of traditional journalists. We expect them to follow the ethics, of course. We want them to make sure that they're delivering facts. But opinion is not a fact. Opinion cannot be refuted. An opinion is an opinion. And so we will still need the traditional journalist who is trained to seek out the facts and to make sure that they're confirming the information. We also want them to interrogate politicians. They're the ones who get invited to the press conferences. Bloggers are rarely on the media list unless it's professional commentators, because the talk show hosts, if you were to think about it, the talk show hosts are all bloggers as well in the contemporary period. They are not trained journalists as well. Dion Jackson Miller did not study journalism. Emily did not study journalism. They're brilliant women. They are public commentators. They are using the media. The traditional media has given them a space and a platform for them to ask questions. And because they are operating within an arena where there's a record over time of factual reporting, that gives them legitimacy. So someone like you, they would say, oh, he's not a journalist. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But based on what I have seen, you are taking your information from these organizations, the Nationwides, the Jamaica Gleaner, the Observer, with a record of factual reporting, and you are not saying anything different than what, in fact, most of your commentary tends to come from what they are reporting. And we hope that their reporting is accurate. Now,
and then from that I deduce and I induce and I put my arguments together, and then we theorize and conceptualize. That's exactly the art of,
and that's the nature of blogging, isn't it? That's the nature of blogging. Will it replace traditional journalism? No, but it's a welcomed addition to the landscape. It's doing a duty that traditional media have failed to do. It is creating a space for ordinary Jamaican citizens who do not have a voice to hear their issues. Even if you can't do anything about it, you have given them a platform to air their grievances, to offer their perspective, to feel like somebody is actually listening.
So, Dr. Johnson, seeing that the bloggers have a little bit more leniency in how they do their shows, don't you believe that traditional media should possibly find an alliance to work with those who are in the new media space, so as to, for instance, if they can't do the hardcore probing, they possibly could form an alliance to make it even greater interesting to get the hardcore truth and to become the real watchdog for this country?
I mean, that will happen, but in a post-colonial society where information was always monopolized and they have a singular source of information that everybody went to, and those were seen to be the credible sources of news and knowledge. There's no longer a monopoly on truth by traditional media, and so I don't think they're ready to invite bloggers, especially the ones who are actually doing real work, like yourself, inside of that space. It is an adjustment. It's an adjustment for them.
Is it an adjustment or a threat, Dr. Johnson?
I know that they see you as a competition. I don't know that they
Would
see
you say competition or threat, Dr. Johnson? I am drilling you tonight in
I
the
would
hat.
say that you are competing for the audience's attention, and you are in many ways winning. And so, because you're talking about issues which resonate with the Jamaican people, and I'm talking, when I say Jamaican people, I'm not talking about middle class, uptown people. I'm talking about ordinary, regular, poor Jamaicans, the farmer, the unemployed, the person in rural Jamaica.
But I
The
will say to you, surprisingly, Dr. Johnson,
Mhm.
even those into the upper echelon of Upper St. Andrew are resonating with the conversations and
I'm not
discourse that
saying that
happen on
they
this
aren't.
platform.
I'm just saying that the focus of your program, based on my observation, is resonating with large swaths of ordinary Jamaicans whose issues have never been given real play.
Oh, I see where your perspective, because many ordinary Jamaicans have been left out of the chain. Um, there's a major void, a gap, that
Mhm.
caveat that they have never been able to get a avenue to speak. So sometimes when I am drained each night, I still have to accommodate people, because when a woman is being battered and beaten by her spouse, and she goes to the police and the police is doing nothing about it. When that young lady is being assaulted by her stepfather and she can't tell her mother, I have to be that ear that listens. And it is surprisingly that the myriad of social issues that are affecting Jamaica, I alone cannot do it. It's
I,
draining. It
I
is.
understand. The part of what we're missing is a genuine civil society. That's a conversation for another day. But we have a very dormant, sedate, sleeping civil society.
Mm,
Civil society organizations, many of them populated by middle class people with an elitist agenda, which the class system in Jamaica has not gone anywhere. It has just taken on new forms. So civil society, which is meant to there are over 5,000 community-based organizations. They are groups that exist. We just don't hear them. We don't hear them. And sometimes when there's a vacuum in leadership and a colossal failure of leadership from the political sphere, and
mm.
failure from civil society, then lone voices sometimes will fill the gap. And so, what we hope is that you, as a blogger who is getting a lot of attention from ordinary Jamaicans who really need that voice, is to be responsible, try to ferret out the facts, try to read, as I see you doing, try to make sure that you cover all the bases so that you can become a credible voice. People don't have to like you, but they should respect what you stand for and the project that you're doing on behalf of the Jamaican people.
Dr. Johnson, being the teacher, the tutor, and the mentor you are to me, I want you to publicly tell Jamaica tonight,
And then I get to go.
and then I will let you go, because I know Jamaica. We will have back, and I can officially dub Dr. Johnson an official lecturer to the Padre University. So when we have different discourse that we want to add, we will have her back.
You
But
know,
Dr. Johnson,
I don't identify as a teacher, you know. I just
no,
have a job as a professor. I don't identify as a teacher. I leave that to you.
yes, but teacher, you certainly give us the education tonight. For somebody who I've never been trained in this sphere, I've never took up journalism to the core.
Mm-hmm.
Grade me tonight after 1 year watching me silently and start looking on and giving me all the suggestions that I need to improve on. Tell Jamaica tonight, have I done well? Where are the places that you want to see me improve on? I want you to tell me, Dr. Johnson, publicly. I am, or I, I am the person who believes in public scrutiny, because through that, my audience, who are my subscribers, who see to it that I get my compensation from YouTube monthly, will be able to match to see
And
whether or not
you
I'm
should
improving.
get compensation. I agree with that. I mean, if we have to pay the Jamaica Gleaner to read it, the news stories, if they are collecting money for their programs. Just listen, brought to you by whatever. They're getting money. Why shouldn't you?
So
Uh,
tell me tonight, Dr. Johnson,
and
grade Andre Stevens, and I want you to
Andre,
grade me the hardest.
Andre, let me just say something that for me, the nature of blogging is that it's going to be subjective. It's going
Mm.
to be an opinion. It's going to be your perspective. What I have an issue with is not so much what you're doing, is the fact that the political infrastructure, particularly the Jamaica Labour Party, I find them unable to handle criticism, and I can't understand the a political organization that does not expect to be critiqued. So the intimidatory tactics which I am seeing emerging, I find that problematic, and I think that that should be reported to the police, because in an emotionally and politically charged society like Jamaica, in a very dangerous country that we have, and I'm going to be blunt about that. Jamaica is a very dangerous place. Uh, when you have people trying to intimidate other people for their opinion, I don't think we should allow that to emerge as a thing in the culture. So that's one. Number two, I think you can't be daunted by criticism. You can't be daunted by the attempts to silence you. Uh, Good thing YouTube and Instagram and TikTok is not controlled by the Jamaican government. People need free speech. People should be able to offer their opinion, not just traditional media, who sometimes succumb to their political and economic interests with the government. So they don't get to speak as freely as some of them would want to. You get to speak freely. And so I think that you should use this platform that you have to speak freely. But remember that a public microphone comes with public responsibility. And so the research needs to be top notch. Your efforts to find sources that are credible is very important. The idea of not making defamatory remarks, libelous comments, you have to be alert to that, which I'm sure that you already are. So those are ethics that are a part of journalistic practice. And because the space that you're in requires, and the discussions that you are having requires you to be credible, it is important that you ensure that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, so that even if we don't like you, and not everybody's going to like you, I like you, but not everybody's going to like you, but they will respect you, and they will respect your opinion, and they will respect what you stand for, and they will respect the motivation of this program, that it's not about self-promotion or self-aggrandizement. It's about giving a voice to Jamaican people and exposing corruption, which is, to me, is the biggest cancer that we have. So you're doing well. There's room for improvement, and we can talk about that off air.
Mm.
I wouldn't give you a grade because my students say I grade harshly, but
But
I usually grade according to what you give me. So you actually grade yourself. I just mirror back to you as a student. I mirror back to you what you've given to me. So I'm watching to see what you are giving me, and then I will grade accordingly.
so Jamaica, I will get the grade, but I won't get it here tonight. But Dr. Hume Johnson, it was a pleasure
It was a pleasure. Thank you. So
having you here. I'm sure the conversation you had tonight was rather refreshing to the thousands of viewers who are watching and who will be watching. And you have made us look at another scope of new media versus traditional media. But thanks again for being here. And until
Yeah.
next time, my name is Andre Stevens. I start getting shy in Jamaica. And you were
Oh,
certainly on the Andre
congratulations.
Stevens show. But bless you, Doc,
Congratulations again.
and it's a
Keep doing
pleasure.
what you're doing. All right, my darling. Take care.